Welcome, everyone out there. It is good to see you. And I am actually going to be streaming on simultaneously on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram right here. So please forgive me. I'll be looking back and forth and looking forward to doing this version of Relate Well with Dr. Rick Marks. That's right. It's another Relate Well with Dr. Rick Marks. And if you are attending with me, please feel free to interact. All right. We're going to talk about self-awareness in healthy marriage. What role does self-awareness actually have in living a healthy, productive life, as well as living a healthy marriage and all relationships, as a matter of fact. And so if you're listening in and you want to hang with me, feel free. Love to have you join me for this time. And if you would, and you're okay with it, feel free to say hi, ask a question, make a statement. I will be monitoring the comment sections on both YouTube and Facebook, as well as Instagram right here. So if you, again, if you have a question, a comment, I want you to feel free to post it and jump right in. Let's make this interactive. All right. Today we're going to talk about, on this version of Late Well with Dr. Rick, we're going to talk about self-awareness and healthy relationships. Now, I've been married, I'll be coming up next month, be 38 years. Now, statistically, Luella and I would be divorced because we both came from divorced homes where there's abuse, addictions, a lot of craziness. Now, there were good times as well. So, in the midst of craziness, there's also good times. So, but statistically, we come from a high risk for divorce. And we are committed to not passing that on. And those who have been watching me or our short clips, over the past few years, know that when I got married 38 years ago, I think I was like 22 at the time, I'm 60 now, I was emotionally a child. That's right. I wasn't a healthy, mature adult. I was emotionally a child. And I dealt with issues in childish ways: silence, stonewalling, manipulation, that kind of crazy stuff. But that's the best I had based on the way I could do things, based on the way I was raised, the only way I knew how to deal with conflict. And so one of the things I had to learn in my growth and maturity, particularly my development as a psychologist and a minister, was I had to learn to grow up emotionally. Would you know, some folks, emotional development requires you having self-awareness. And so if you've done any research or reading around the area of what's called emotional intelligence, you'll know that there are four fundamentals to emotional intelligence, and they work sequentially. The first two are known as personal competencies. In other words, there's two things personally you have to learn to master for emotional intelligence. And then once you master those two things, then you master the two higher, what are known as social competencies. The first two personal competencies that one must master for emotional intelligence, number one is self-awareness. To become self-aware, we'll talk about that and define that in just a minute for you. To become self-aware, once you have mastered self-awareness, you can then begin to master the second emotional personal competency, which is self-management, self-control, self-regulation. You can't stop yourself from doing something if you're not aware that you're doing it. You see, some people don't have the maturity to be aware they're being mean. Some people don't have the maturity to be aware of how they're coming across. One of my mentors, and I use this quote a lot, so those who follow me regularly have heard this before, but repetition is always good, right? And one of the things my mentor, Dr. Lori Gordon, always said to me was, and I learned it from her, was the way you think you come across is not the way you do come across. The way you think you're being experienced is not the way you are being experienced. And what people do, folks, is we tend to defend how we think we are and believe we are, but it's how we are that ultimately matters. The disconnect between how I think I am and how I am is the problem. Did you get that? That is the problem, because mature people they know exactly how they're coming across. And the way they intend to come across is the way they do come across. You see, I did not know I was manipulative. I never saw it, but Luella did. I did not know that I was sulk and whine, but Luella did. I did not know. You get the impression. You get the message. And so what I really had to learn to do is develop self-awareness so I could have self-control. I needed to be able to recognize what I was doing and why I was doing it. Now, self-awareness is actually a skill that anyone can learn. Anyone can learn it. Self-awareness is the why of what you're doing. We need to know our whys. We need to be aware of, why am I doing what I'm doing? Self-awareness is the ability to understand one's emotional state in a moment. Self-awareness is almost like having this third eye in the back of your head that's watching objectively what you're doing, how you're feeling inside, what's taking place inside of you, so that you can regulate it. You see, self-awareness means you have to have an accurate emotional understanding of yourself, which is essential for having an emotional vocabulary. You see, why are you doing what you're doing? Do you understand what you're doing in this moment? Do you understand how you're coming across? That's self-awareness. The lack of self-awareness is an indication of immaturity. And so in self-awareness, we begin to, in a sense, develop an understanding of our patterns of behavior. Our patterns of behavior. Do you understand why you act a certain way when these things happen? Do you understand how you come across when you're not getting your way? Do you understand that when this person does something like this, do you understand how you come across and why you do what you do? You see, we have behaviors that we do that are patterns. Do you know your patterns of behavior? If you do and you continue to do it, that would just suggest you don't care. You see, do you know what your triggers are? Do you know what the triggers are that trigger a certain behavior in you? Are you aware of the things that, when they happen, create anger or hurt or fear and insecurity? And that's why you yell or scream or withdraw? We need to know what those patterns of behavior are. Do you know what patterns that you have that self-sabotage you? Do you know what patterns of behavior are when you give into fear and insecurities? So one of the things you need to know, or be self-aware, what are your patterns of behavior? Another thing you need to know is, we also have a pattern, a way of thinking. That's what I call it, a way of thinking. A way of thinking is a pattern. You see, we have a pattern of thinking, a way that we understand the world, the way that we look at the world, the way we think about the world. Do you understand that when these things happen, you think this way? Do you understand when that takes place, you assume that your brain automatically makes an assumption about those things? Self-awareness means that I also know what my ways of thinking are, what my patterns of thinking are, my patterns of assumptions that I make, that I don't check out to see if they're based in reality. You see, how do you tend to think about what happens in life? How do you think about what happens in your marriage? What are the thoughts that you tend to go to when you're not getting your way? Because I had a core belief system that I'm not good enough and I'm unlovable and that I don't matter. Those, what I call stories, those stories that were deep in my soul, buried in the hippocampus of the brain, where they lie, those things created a lot of negative self-talk in me. And I call that little voice in the head it. And I would listen to it. It's not your friend, by the way. It will always make sure you look good and everyone else looks bad, because it will never look bad. It will always look good. So it will blame, it will rationalize, it will defend. The problem with that little it voice in your head, it thinks this way: I'm right, you're wrong. Get over it. Suck it up. You don't know what you're talking about. You should, you shouldn't. what's in it for me? Well, I did that because, or you did that because, or I did that in order to, see, it is always about, it's looking at the world from the back of your head. It's like somebody sitting in the stands of a stadium, and down there on the field or court is life. But the people in the stands, they don't engage life in life. What they do, they sit up in the stands watching life, judging, criticizing it. But they never come outside of themselves to deal with what's happening in life. And because of that, they're not aware of their inner self-talk, their inner thoughts. Self-awareness means you need to know, what are your core belief systems? What's your way of thinking about the world? What's your way of thinking about yourself? What is your own negative self-talk? What are your stories? And then how do your stories affect your thinking and perception of the world? And we also need to know what patterns we have in our emotions. Do you have a pattern of emotion? Do you have a lot of ups and downs? Do you tend to be down more than up? Do you tend to look at things emotionally in a positive way or a negative way? You see? Do you try to observe and recognize your emotions before you react with them? That's self-control. You see, when you're experiencing difficult emotions such as anger or sadness or fear, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? Do you just react impulsively? Or are you able to respond? Responding means that you're thoughtful. You sit with what's taking place. You can figure out where it's coming from. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is understanding your why. Why am I thinking this way? Why am I acting this way? Why do I feel this way? Why am I coming across this way? Why do I always assume this about Luella? You see, that is exactly what self-awareness allows you to do. But for self-awareness to have to happen, you're going to have to master patience and kindness. Did you get that? You have to master patience and kindness, because when you're acting impulsively, you're not patient. You have to take that deep breath, regulate your heart, slow your breathing down, get your heart rate under 100 beats per minute, so that you can keep the rational mind engaged, the thinking brain, the brain that has the ability to think and reason and ponder. And you have to keep that engaged. And then you begin to think about what's going on inside of you, to ask the tough questions of yourself, rather than have someone ask them of you. One of the great benefits of self-awareness is that because I have the ability to regulate myself, because I have the ability to regulate who I am and how I am in a moment, I tend to not hurt a lot of people along the way. Why? Self-regulation, which comes from self-awareness. Can't stop doing what you're doing if you're not aware that you're doing it. Side note, if you're self-aware and you know you're doing something, and you know what you're doing is destructive, and you continue to do it, that's, to me, in my opinion, that just means you don't care. And that's a whole different conversation. You see, maturity, emotional maturity, being an emotionally mature adult, requires self-awareness and self-control. But what are the benefits? I mean, if I choose to live a life of self-awareness, if I choose to live in a way that I want to become a healthy, mature adult who regulates him or herself, so that when I struggle with something, I can check myself before I act impulsively. I can respond before I react. What would be some of the benefits that? I think the first benefit you'll find is the ability to have a healthy, mature, loving, connected marriage. We live by 4 words in our Relate Well program. And actually, I should say I live by 4 words, and they're in my Relate Well program, probably the better way to put it. And the 4 words I tend to live by is a way of being, is I always ask myself, is what I'm doing right here, right now, in this moment, is it goodwill? Is it being respectful? Is it caring, empathy? And to do that, I must have humility. So the 4 words I live by are goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. In all aspects of my life, I try to be those 4 things on a regular basis as a way of being. It's a pattern of living, you see. So if I choose to live that way, number 1, my marriage will be more loving. It'll be more mature. It'll be more accepting. It'll be more approving. It'll be more comforting. It'll be more encouraging. It'll be more supportive. All just because by living a mature life, which requires self-awareness, you'll have a healthier relationship. You'll have healthy boundaries for yourself. You'll respect your partner's boundaries. You'll respect their thoughts. They'll respect your thoughts. You'll respect their feelings. You'll respect your feelings. All from self-awareness. The second thing I believe you'll find as a outgrowth of living a mature life is you'll have calmer moods. You ever notice there are people who constantly up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. There's like no sense of balance emotionally in their life, you know? They're either angry or they're not. They're either sad or they're not. They're afraid or they're not. And it's like there's no sense of balance where they can experience a wide range of emotions in a healthy, mature way. You know, we're all looking for peace. Peace in our relationships, peace within ourselves, peace in our mind, peace in our heart. Self-awareness is one of the keys to get you there, you see. And so it'll allow you to live a consistent life of calmer moods, a little more peaceful life, emotionally steady, if I can use that phrase, if you don't mind. You see, you'll regulate your anxiety. You'll be able to think through what your anger is about and resolve it quicker. I think another thing that self-awareness does, it gives you a clear sense of your decision-making and your thinking. Yes, you get clarity around what you're thinking, which allows you to make better decisions for your life. Did you get that? You think clearer because you're not reacting impulsively. Because self-awareness requires patience and kindness. And you'll make better decisions with what you're feeling and thinking because you'll be in self-control. Remember, self-regulation, self-awareness leads to self-regulation. And I think another benefit is you will then see an increase in love, a decrease in angst in your relationship. You'll see an increase of what we call a sense of usness. You'll be living out of a sense of usness longer than if you had not. And therein lies the power of living a life developed from self-awareness. Now, what are some ways you can improve your self-awareness? I'm going to cover some with you here. Number 1, if you're taking notes, one thing you can do is ask people around you if you need to, or just pay attention to the people around you and see how they react to you. What are things that bother them about you? What are areas in your life that they react to in a negative way? So you may be triggering something in people. It might be you doing something in them that's triggering them. So what is it about you, you see, what is it about you that's triggering other people? Now, if you notice someone is triggered around you, rather than blame them for it, why don't you take the humble approach and say something like, hey, I noticed that when I shared this or that, I noticed you had a kind of negatively reacted. Can you help me understand what I did that caused that? Can you tell me how I came across? You see, that's humility. That's humility. Pride just blames people. Humility will step back and even ask the question, could this be about me? Could I be creating this? Remember, I said earlier, my mentor told me the way you think you come across is not the way you do come across. The way you think you're being experienced is not the way you are being experienced. And what people do is they defend how they think they are, believe they are. But they don't know how they're coming across. Why? They lack self-awareness. I think people who are self-aware will pay attention to what bothers them, but also what bothers other people, particularly about themselves. You see, maybe you have a tendency to deceive. Maybe you have a tendency to be reactive. Maybe you have a tendency to be distrusting. Maybe you have a tendency to fill in the blank. Got it? Are you self-aware about those things, and then how they come across, how they're expressed in your relationships with those around you? So one of the things you can do is pay attention to yourself, what bothers you and what bothers people around you. Another thing you can do is practice mindfulness. You're hearing a lot about mindfulness today. Mindfulness it is the practice of learning to living in the present. You can practice mindfulness in meditation, prayer, but the power of mindfulness is staying conscious of the moment, being fully in the present, outside of you, not listening to that little voice in your head, judging and criticizing what's out here in reality. It's the ability to meditate on your own mind. You get, why am I feeling this way? And you step back and you just think about it and you feel it and you ponder. I like that word, ponder. I don't know why, I just do. You ponder it. You consider it. You ruminate on it. And God will give you an answer. Other people, you can go ask other people, get input from them. So I think another thing you can do is to meditate on your own mind. Mindfulness is a very powerful way to live life, and you're seeing a lot on it. I attended a webinar here last year where some neuropsych guys out of Duke did a training on the brain and how mindfulness, meditation, and prayer, according to the brain and how the brain works, are all basically the same process. And they pointed out that people who practice on a regular basis prayer, meditation, and or mindfulness, since they're all pretty much the same thing according to the brain, how the brain functions, these people tend to have greater levels of self-awareness and self-control. Interesting, isn't it? Because those three things force you to be in the present, conscious to yourself and conscious to other people, what's going on around you. So another thing you can do is practice mindfulness. Another one is know your emotional hand grenades. All right. What are the things that set you off? What are the things that when they happen, there's an explosion? Got it? I mean, you're in an adolescent or a child state the moment those things happen. What's your emotional hand grenades? You see, let's be honest. People don't want to grow up being angry or fearful or depressed or sad or distrusting. Things happen in life that cause that. Now, in our Relate Well work, we talk about the 10 core relational needs that all humans have that must be met, just like food, air, water, and shelter. We refer to these relational needs as CARES, C-A-R-E-S. It's actually C-A to the fifth power, R-E-S squared. And they're the 10 relational needs that are hardwired into the limbic brain, which is the emotional part of the brain. These needs must be met and will be met. And here's the thing. When these needs are met, you feel loved. When they're not met, you feel unloved. When they're met, pleasure. When they're not met, pain. The brain is wired to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. And when our needs are not met, our brain becomes hypersensitive around being wounded in those areas. Example, looking back at my life, I'm 60 now. One of the things that I think I'm been most emotionally triggered around is the area of respect. Never got it growing up. And so as an adult, looking back at my life, my early days, I would get quickly defensive. I mean, fight, flight, or freeze. If my brain sensed I was being disrespected. Now, whether I'm being disrespected or not in reality didn't matter. My brain sensed it. It assumed it. And I was in a reactive mode. It's the emotional hand grenade. You see, and then you start lobbing your hand grenades at those people because of how you're feeling. we all have those. We all have those areas where we're triggered. There's a passage in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrew, where we're told to lay aside the sin that easily besets us. I think all of us have an area of our lives where we're quickly triggered into defensive or hurt or yelling or screaming, whatever the destructive behavior might be. You see, we all have that. These kinds of things can create social anxiety in ourselves. They can create social anxiety in others. They can create depression in you. They can create resentment in you. They can create unforgiveness in you. And all of this destroys relationships. At the same time, it's destroying your own heart and destroying your own soul. What are your emotional hand grenades? What are the things that when they happen, trigger you? You know, Superman had a weakness, and it was some kind of a rock that was called what? Kryptonite. It's called kryptonite. What's your kryptonite? What's your kryptonite? What's the thing in you that triggers you? You know what it is? Self-awareness will help you get there. And once you know what that is, what you do, you shore up that area of your life so that you build a protective wall around that. You learn to think things differently. If it's a wounded part of your soul, then you heal the wound around it. Why? So you're not so easily triggered in that area anymore. All right. Now, another thing you can do that I think we can all do is you can kind of look back at your life and ask yourselves, what are some things that have happened to me? What are things that I've learned about life? What are the hurts and the pains in my life? Where have I made bad choices? Where have I made good choices? I think sometimes when we sit back and ponder our life kind of in a timeline, and we can see the parts where we've been more mature or less mature. We can see where we've been. We can notice how, gosh, look, over here, I've been growing and growing in my maturity. I've been handling things better. And here I am at 60 years old. And I deal with things very differently today than I did 10 years ago, than I did 20 years ago, than I did 30 years ago. Some of you listening may be doing the same thing, the same way in your life that you've done for 30 years. Nothing's really changed. Or maybe things have just gotten worse. That would suggest you lack self-awareness and lack self-control. And it could also suggest you just don't care, you see. And so one of the things you can do is take a timeline, maybe get a sheet of paper or a poster board and starting back at your birth. Just start, what were the significant events that you can recall in your life that had an emotional impact on you? And as you kind of go from age 0 to where you are today, plot those things on a graph, if you will, and then ask yourself these questions. All right, with this event, what happened? What were the emotions? What was the effect on me? How do I think that's affecting my life today? And see how many of those things are maybe having an impact on your life today. Once you understand what those things are doing today in the present, then you can make a decision about whether you want to let something go or not. Maybe you need to forgive something. Maybe you need to change your way of thinking about the world, you see. And so if you need help with that, get a counselor, get a mentor, get a coach to help you get detached from what happened to who you are today in reality. All right. So that's one thing you can do. It is kind of start taking a look at your timeline, your history. All right. Another thing you can do, and this is very important. Get that? Hear that pregnant pause there? This is very important. Another thing you can do, ask people for feedback. Ask people for feedback. One of the hardest things I had to learn to do years ago, but I'm okay doing it now, is asking this question. How am I coming across right now? I actually like that question. How am I coming across? Now, by the way, folks, if you ask someone that question and they tell you how you're coming across to them, because that's what you're asking, and you get defensive, you're the problem. You're the problem. If you ask someone for input into your life and then you're defensive about it, that says a lot about you. If you don't want to know, don't ask. But you ask people for input. You really want their input. Ponder what they say. Consider that on some level, to some degree, they may be right about what they see in you. And to whatever degree they are right about what they see, fix it, change it, transform it. I remember once a guy, I was doing a marriage session with a couple, and she was sharing these two particular traits. And finally, he got humble and he goes, "Okay, well, fine. I can admit that I do those things." And he says this, "But that may be only 10 or 20% of who I am, not 80 or 90. And she didn't say a word to him. And I said, "Sir, here's the problem you're having right now." He said, "What's that?" I said, "I appreciate the fact that you're acknowledging that on some level she's right. The problem is what you're calling 10 or 20% of you to her feels like 80 or 90. And therein lies the problem. Lack of self-awareness, a lack of understanding." Yeah, she did some love, but in reality, she was actually right. You see. And so you can look back at your development, your life history, and begin to make some decisions about it for yourself, who you are, how things have shaped you. I think another thing that you can do is when you ask people for feedback, ask them, "What do you think I could do different?" If they give you feedback about something, "What would you like me to do different? How could I do this better for you? What would make more sense to you?" Maybe once you get their feedback, how you're coming across, maybe you can also ask them, "Hey, what do you think I could do different? Um, in what way could I function that would send you a different message?" I think you can always get wonderful feedback. Now, I've had some mentors in my life, and one in particular, his name is Marshall. Marshall's older than me, like a big brother I never had. Marshall, I met when I was a young buck in the Navy, 19 years old. He was my Sunday school teacher. I love and respect this man dearly to this day. Marshall would speak into my life, and he told me things about me that I didn't want to hear. And I didn't like hearing it, but I accepted what he said and I pondered what he said. Why? Because I knew that he loved me and I knew that he valued me. And I think that's the key, I think that's the key. People who love you and value you will give you the input you're looking for. Why? There's an old Jewish proverb that says, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend." Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Then you ask, well, why are the wounds of a friend faithful? Here's why. Because when a friend tells you something about you that's true of you, but that will be painful for you to hear, they actually risk the friendship. They risk the friendship at that moment, but they're willing to risk the friendship. Why? Because they love you enough to want to be honest with you, to be open with you. And I think that's another power of opening things up and getting feedback, And I think other thing we can do, we can learn new skills. We can learn emotional skills. We can learn emotional regulation skills. We can learn how to communicate better and relate well. We teach you how to communicate. We teach you how to emotionally regulate. So we actually teach the fundamentals for healthy relationships and connection and bonding and attachment, communication, problem solving. Why? Because if you have the skills for it, then you can create what you want. You see, can't create what you want if you don't know how to create it. Traditional marriage therapy doesn't teach you what to do different. It teaches you why you're doing what you're doing. But just because you tell me why I'm doing it doesn't mean I know how to change it, you see. And I see, so one of the things I think you can do is learn something new, learn some new skills, learn new ways, all right? In order to do that, you're going to have to be humble. You're going to have to be humble. Why? Humility creates teachability. Did you get that? Humility creates teachability. You can't learn if you're not teachable. Listen, folks, you only learn by listening. You don't learn by talking. Did you get that? You learn by listening. You don't learn by talking. Maybe you can start learning some things about yourself with your spouse by listening to them. And when they're sharing something with you about the relationship and what they see in your relationship, rather than get defensive, listen. Don't write them off right away. They may be right on some level. Consider that possibility. And if you're considering the possibility, you're actually developing self-awareness. You're learning something new about you that you didn't know you didn't know. You see, self-awareness creates a healthy life. It makes you become a healthy, mature person, which means you can create a healthy, loving, mature marriage. The power of self-awareness. And if you're needing that self-awareness in your own life, get a mentor, get a coach, get a counselor. But don't stay where you are. Care enough about yourself. Become the person that you want to become. It's Dr. Rick. Thanks for attending another session of Relate Well with Dr. Rick Mars. And y'all have a great day, everybody.